Is 2026 your year for a bold career change? Let's talk about big moves and why sales might be one of the best career paths out there in today's episode of Closing Time. Welcome to Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, head of marketing for Insightly, Unbounce, and LeadsRx. Today, we're kicking off the year and talking about bold career moves. With economic uncertainty looming, you may be looking at a career change. We've talked a lot on this show about sales careers, the benefits, how it offers flexibility, growth, income potential, and the ability to chart your own path. This can be especially attractive for women who currently only fill about 32% of sales roles. So to talk more about career reinvention in general, and specifically a little bit about sales, we've invited Katia Vlachos to join us today. She is the author of Uncaged, and she is an expert in reinvention. Welcome to the show, Katia.
It's great to be here, Val. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's start big and bold as we boldly rush into 2026. When someone is considering changing careers, especially entering something that's new to them, what motivates that reinvention?
So in my experience, not just my reinvention, but also my work with people reinventing themselves, usually, there's two things. Something happens externally. So it can be a layoff, a reorganization, realizing your industry is not going anywhere, or it can be a major life event like a divorce or a big loss, like some kind of transition that pushes people to start asking questions. Am I in the right place? Is this for me? Does this fulfill my potential? Does it feel meaningful? But there's also like internal shifts that can happen. And usually they happen around midlife, where people again are kind of either hit a wall like I did, or they start like wondering, is this meaningful for me? Am I making the most of my potential? Again, asking those big questions. And usually the answer is, okay, I need to change things. I need to reinvent myself. So, I think that's kind of more the internal and the external factors that motivate people to reinvent themselves. A lot of my clients are kind of stuck in the corporate cage, as they call them. They feel very restricted. They feel like they're not really, they don't really have a sense of purpose. So that kind of triggers them to start thinking, okay, what else can I do with my life? And very often people have no clue, right, what it is that they want to do, but they know that something needs to change.
I love that. It must be a really scary feeling to feel inside when you have that moment. I would say a lot of times people feel career change might be reckless or risky, but in your work, maybe we could talk about some of the benefits of reinventing yourself to kind of combat those reckless or risky feelings.
Right. And it can be very scary. And what I often say is, when the pain of staying where you are is bigger than the fear or the pain of making the change. That's when you reinvent yourself. And there's a lot on the other side. There's a lot of positives on the other side. So the biggest benefit is this sense of alignment between who you are and where you are, what you do, right? Your next step is usually more aligned with what's important to you, with your values, with a sense of purpose. You have more control over it. I mean, I don't know about you, but a lot of, from my experience, but also from a lot of people who are my clients, the first career or the first part of like your professional life is not always a conscious choice. It's a lot of expectations and beliefs about what's right for us and what's the right path, what's the appropriate path, what success is like. And when you reach the turning point where you decide to reinvent yourself, you have a much more intentional approach, a much more conscious approach of, I'm going to do something that feels meaningful to me, not according to everything I've been told from the outside. So alignment is one. And alignment also gives you a different kind of energy, because you're not spending your energy trying to be someone you're not, or trying to fit in some sort of box or hide parts of you that don't really fit in. But it's the energy you get back by being able to be yourself and feeling like you're you're on your own path. The second thing is you also discover what you're capable of, right? Because we don't often utilize our full potential. And again, by making the next move much more intentional and much more aligned, you realize that there's a lot more things you can do that you're capable of. So you get you see the big picture more. It's an empowering move, again, having to do with it being your decision rather than somebody else's. And there's also a ripple effect on your well-being, on your relationships. I mean, nothing we do happens in isolation, right? So when you're feeling more fulfilled, more aligned, more have more energy, you feel better. You are a better person. Your relationships are, they have a different energy to them. So yeah, I think that's kind of there's so many positives on the other side of reinvention.
I like what you said about, sometimes early in your career, you sort of just fall into something. I think one of the things we see about people who choose sales later in their career is that perhaps they didn't have that confidence in themselves early on to not have a W-2, to be an employee that, strictly relies on themselves and works on commission. So something that you said made me think about how maybe more of that confidence you achieve that later in life, and then that can push you to a career change where, to something a little bit less stable, but with potentially more upside.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely have a point. We become so much more aware of what our strengths are, what our, motivation is, what we're capable of when we're in midlife. And we come also, we care a little bit less about what other people say. So yeah, there's definitely a change that helps the process of reinvention. I see it all the time.
In your work, are there times where you have to help people overcome barriers, either internal or external, that might keep people from reinventing themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The barriers can be, they can be, of course, the practical barriers, like, financial, logistical, the timing might be a problem. But I find that the biggest barrier are actually internal. And I alluded to it a bit, first of all, the conditioning, like all the beliefs we've inherited about where we should be and what we should be doing. I call it in my book, the good girl cages. There's like, when you're a good girl, you have a certain path, you have to check these kinds of boxes. You have to excel at everything, or you have to, sacrifice for others, and all these kinds of beliefs. So that's one big barrier to overcome. The second one is the attachment to your previous career, the identity element. So, for many people, their job, their position, their role is part of their identity. So leaving that behind as they see it, it feels scary, because who are you without, being, title X or Y? Who are you detached from that identity? That can be quite daunting, right? And of course, the identity comes with, the salary and the respect and the authority, which a lot of people think they have to rebuild that from scratch. So that creates a hesitation. There is a lot of hesitation around, how are people going to perceive this? How are people going to react to me making this change? Am I going to, be rejected? Am I going to be ridiculed? Are people going to understand? So there's a lot of focus around, what the reaction will be. And as if we're kind of waiting to be given permission from the outside, when the permission really has to come from us. So there's a lot of worry around that. And then there's all sorts of myths around reinvention and fears that are linked to these myths, right? So am I too old to reinvent myself? Or, what happens if I fail? Or do I have what it takes to succeed? So again, these are also, a lot of them are linked to conditioning, coming back to the first big barrier, because, are you sure this is the right step? And is this the responsible thing to do? And all these kind of voices that may hold people back when they're contemplating a major move like this.
Yeah, I do want to dive in because you use the word fear, and I think that that's huge. One of the things that I think a lot of people face, maybe disproportionately women, is am I not qualified enough? And when you said, someone you're waiting for someone to give you permission, but that permission comes from you. So how do you help people overcome that I'm not qualified enough to make this change?
Mm-hmm. So I hear it a lot. Maybe I'm not qualified enough, or maybe I need to get, XYZ certifications, or do I have the personality, appropriate for this role? Am I resilient enough, or am I extroverted enough? Or, in sales, for example, there's a lot of like stereotypes around the type of person you have to be. I wonder if that's also, part of the reason why there's fewer women than men in these roles. But all these are stories we hear, or these are part of our conditioning. We hear them growing up, or maybe, there's like something that happens at a very early age that leads us to adopt a certain belief. So a lot of the work we do is around questioning those stories and asking, is this really true? Is there evidence for that? Or is there evidence, that perhaps the opposite is true for you? And do you really need like 10 more certifications? Or, do you really need to be a raging extrovert? I don't know. I'm just saying, we challenge a lot of these assumptions, because a lot of them are just things we've heard. Same with, I'm too old to do this, or, I will have to burn everything down. And if I'm going to reinvent myself, I'm starting from scratch. That is not true either. A lot of people, take this as a fact, but it really isn't, because you always bring with you, your experience, everything, you've done in the past, even if it's in a completely different field, right? I'm now a coach. I used to be a researcher. Like those two don't really have a lot to do. But I do bring a lot of my analytical skills, for example, in my coaching, or in my writing. My research skills come in handy. So we always build bridges from where you are to where you want to be. But I also wanted to talk about another fear. It's not just the fear of failure that's a problem. It's also the fear of success, right? If I get what I want, right? If I do reinvent myself, what's going to happen to the people I love? Am I going to be harming them in any way? I don't know. A lot of women have families, and they're like, am I still going to be able to be available? Are my loved ones going to understand this change? Are they going to agree? Like, again, waiting for all this permission, and taking all the burden and all the responsibility and assuming that this move is not going to be beneficial for everyone. Right. But the truth is, if you're doing something that's fulfilling and that feels like you, and that's your decision, this is a win-win for everybody, because you show up in a different way for the people around you, and that has a positive impact on them.
I love what you said about the stereotypical extrovert sales representative, because from what I have seen in the years doing this podcast and working in the CRM business, that what truly successful sales leaders have is they are extremely organized, and they are extremely diligent, and they follow up, and they pay attention to detail. And I don't necessarily associate that with being introverted or being extroverted. At times, I associate those qualities with females. So to me, to have women so underrepresented in sales at this point really seems like a mismatch, because so many of the qualities that make someone successful in sales really are associated with, a lot of qualities that many amazing women I see already have. So just thinking along those lines, like how helping people transfer skills that they have to the job that they want seems to be like a really nice pathway to build up that confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, you realize you're not starting from scratch, and you realize how much more you have than you think. You do, right? And I mean, when you were talking about the skills, it also made me think of, building relationships. We're really good at that. And you don't have to be an extrovert or an introvert. Actually, introverts are even better at that because, we listen more intently or we're more present and we're really good at that. So yeah, it's more about, what skills do you need, not who are you, or what skills could you be building on to make the transition.
All right. So it's 2026. If you had to give someone one piece of advice from all of your body of work to start fresh, begin a new career chapter, really embrace the unknown, what would that one piece of advice be?
Can I give 3?
Sure.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short. No.
Okay.
I always have my 3 points, right? So the first one is to know why you're doing this. Right? What is your why for reinvention? And the reason why this is important is because it's going to keep you on track also through the challenging moments. And it's going to be your North Star. It's going to keep you on your direction, right? So what's your purpose? What's your why? The second thing is, know when to stop collecting information and certifications or whatever, and when it's time to take action. And by take action, I mean, even like what's the smallest possible step you can take even today, right? Maybe it's sending an email, maybe it's signing up for like a conversation or a networking event. I don't know, but like something tiny. And the third thing is try to surround yourself with people who see you, but like the real you, and who will support you, because that's really, really important. And also people who are maybe a bit ahead from you in the process, or maybe, already in sales or thriving, because it's really important to have a sense of what's possible, right? And see that, okay, this is attainable. It's not some kind of crazy dream, right? So sorry, 3 but quick ones.
That's great. I hope we've inspired someone. Before we wrap, I just want to talk about your book, Uncaged. It's a guide for people who want to break free from expectations and design a more aligned life, which I love that. Where can folks get the book?
So everywhere you get books, so Amazon and Amazon mainly, I think, between Europe and the US, that's the easiest platform. Or you can go on uncaged.net. That's my page for the book. But yeah, just everywhere you get books. It's called Uncaged, The Good Girl's Journey to Reinvention.
Love it. All right. Thank you, Katia, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. It's great being here.
And thanks to everybody for tuning into this episode of Closing Time. Remember, you can get this episode and every episode of Closing Time delivered right to your inbox. Click the link in the show notes, and we will see you next week.